Today is June 1st, 2008. I am Cassie Potasic, and it is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Wishick, North Dakota. Can you please tell me your full name?
Tillie Rath.
What's your maiden name?
Tillie Diesz.
All right. When and where were you born?
I was born in McIntosh County on March the 17th, 1931, on the farm.
Have you ever heard an interesting story about your birth?
Yes.
Would you share it with us?
I wasn't registered.
Why not?
I must have been sick because my dad took me to Linton. I was baptized the same day I was born. And I don't know, I just think that I wasn't well. And what else? I had that grandma was there and a midwife. They were the witnesses. I had a hard time getting my birth certificate.
Why?
Because I had to have so many things like school records, hospital records. My mother was still alive, and I was glad she was. Hospital records, and I ended up with 2 birthdays or 3 birthdays, 2 names. Finally, they said I could choose the name I wanted. So I chose Tillie.
What was the other name?
Diesz, and then my middle name is Caroline.
Right. Can you share some of your earliest memories with us?
The earliest memory I have was I got my finger in the door. I must have been about 3, and I still have a knot. I must have broke my finger. And I cried and cried. My mother said, "Don't do that again." So that's my earliest. And my second memory is when my grandma Diesz passed away. And then her body she was at the house, and I remember I couldn't see in, and they had to lift me up to look into the coffin. I remember that. I must have been about 3 or 4.
Do you remember anything else about that funeral?
No, I don't. I just remember Grandma was there, and
Right.
I was born in Emmons County. I made a mistake.
All right. Okay, you mentioned your grandma's funeral. Were you close to any of your grandparents growing up?
I was to my mother's mother.
Can you tell me about her?
She was kind of she was a real tiny lady, and she lived in Hillsview, South Dakota. I remember my mother got sick one time and couldn't take care of us. So they put us on the train at Linton, and we went down to Hillsview. And what I remember is I didn't want to get out of the train. And my grandma said, "She's always stubborn, has been stubborn." But no, I was close to her, but the other grandma died when I was young.
And what was this grandmother's name?
Elizabeth Malsom. Her maiden name was Imberry.
Right. Were you close to your grandfathers?
My grandfather Malsom died when I don't remember him. He must have died in the early 30s. But yeah, to Grandpa Diesz I was.
Can you tell me about Grandpa Diesz?
He was kind of a gentle man. He never raised his voice, and whenever we got there, they always had something for us. Because my dad was the oldest in the family, and actually, we must have been the first grandchildren they had. My brother was the only one they had for a long time, and they spoiled him. And he's going to be 85, and he's still spoiled. Because he was born, and then the next 2 that were born, they died. One was 11, and one was a year and a half. And then my brother had a ruptured appendix. And they took him to Bismarck, and he was actually there a whole month. They didn't think he'd recover. But he's such an outgoing person. Everybody catered to him, and they still do.
All right. So do you have memories of staying with any of your grandparents?
With Grandma Malsom, I do.
Can you share some of those?
Well, one thing, she always had a nice garden and a big house. And my grandpa, my aunt and uncle lived upstairs. It was a 2-story house, and they lived upstairs. I thought it was such a big house, but I suppose by now it isn't. It's still in South Dakota. Somebody moved it out of town and remodeled it just like it was. And Grandma was always nice to us. But we always had to go to church in the morning, every morning.
So your grandmother was very religious?
Yes, she was. I think she even played the organ in church, as far as I remember. And she took all the flowers over and decorated all the time. And she died in Bismarck, but she was in the nursing home in Dickinson. And when we went over to see her, it's before I got married, and I bought my wedding dress over there while we went over to see Grandma Malsom. And she used to come and stay with us. That I remember.
Can you share some of those stories?
When we were in Billings, she came to see us. And I remember one time she came to see us, and my mother was in church, and I don't know what day of the week it was. And Grandma was standing in front of church, and she said, "You're never home. I come to see you, and you're never home." And she wanted her to go to church. So Mom was in church, and she stood in front of church, and she kind of told my mother she's never home. But she was funny. We always liked her. And we made homemade ice cream, and she said, "It's so cold." So when we lived on the farm, we had one of those cook stoves. So Grandma put her ice cream on the stove. And she said, "I just can't handle this. It's so cold." So she melted it and warmed it up. That's one thing I remember about her.
Right. So is there anything else you'd like to share about either of your grandparents that you remember?
Well, when Grandma died, her funeral was in South Dakota, but she died in Bismarck, and then they brought her to Linton, and she was at our house. Because my mother's sister was coming from Detroit, Michigan, and if they wouldn't have taken her to the house, she couldn't see her. And my mother sewed her address for the funeral. And Grandma, they brought her, you know, when Grandma died, she didn't have a nice dress. My mom sewed her a real nice dress. I remember they took a picture for her one time, and she took her apron off, hung it by the fence, and she was standing there, and the apron was hanging by the fence. She didn't want it on the picture.
Right. You mentioned your aunt and uncle living upstairs in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that aunt and uncle?
They were very nice people.
What were their names?
I was named after her, Casper and Ottilia Volk. See, Grandma was married twice, and her first husband was a Volk. And she had 4 children. Grandpa Malsom had 4 children, and together they had 4 children. So there were 12. But they were very musical. Uncle Casper played the accordion, and they always had a good time.
Do you remember what songs he played?
Mm-mm. It was always old-time music. I don't remember the songs.
Did anybody else play instruments?
Let me see, their son played accordion. And, gee, I just can't remember. I know there were more of them. They were very musical. When my mother got married and moved to Linton, the Dieszes were not musical. She couldn't hardly handle it, that they didn't sing all the time like they did at home. Mom said, "I don't know, I came to Linton and they were just different people here than the people in South Dakota." Because her family, they were very musical and very outgoing. Not that the Dieszes weren't outgoing, but her family was exceptional. Very.
Okay. Do you remember any of your other aunts and uncles when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, I do. I remember all the Dieses. Aunt Carolyn was my baptismal sponsor. So my middle name was named after, that was Dad's sister. And his youngest brother lived in the home place, Uncle Joe. And Uncle Frank, I don't remember him that well. They moved out to Washington or Oregon, wherever they were at. And then my dad's sister, Aunt Marion, she lived in Kansas. I did know her, but not that well. But Aunt Elizabeth, she was at home yet when Grandma died. She was a young girl. Her I actually know the best, and she's the only one that's still alive. She lives in Linton, my dad's youngest sister. I think out of the whole aunt and uncle, she's the only one that's alive. The rest are all gone.
Did you have a favorite aunt or uncle?
Mm-hmm. My godmother, Aunt Caroline. When Aunt Caroline was very ill and we knew that she wouldn't live too long anymore, we just went over to see her on a Sunday night. It was a night like tonight. And we went to the hospital to see her, and she really appreciated it that we came. I remember when we got married, she handed me a $5 bill, and I thought that was really great.
Right. Can you tell me about your cousins when you were growing up?
Mm-hmm. I can. We had cousins living in the area, and the Malsums lived close to town, and I think there was, I think they had 10 children. And I remember a couple of Sundays, we walked 7 miles they lived on the outskirts of Linton, and we would stop there and visit with them and walk home, and it took all day Sunday to go back and forth to go and see him. Then we had cousins that didn't live very far from our place either.
Did you have a favorite cousin?
I think I did. Yeah, I did. Maggie.
Can you tell me about Maggie?
Well, she was always such a nice person. She still is. She was just always went out of her way to see how is everything? How are you doing? And this and that. And she still is like that. She lives in Linton. We see her once in a while. She's a very nice person. I used to come to town and stay at their house. My aunt and uncle had, I don't know, he had kids, she had kids, and they had kids. I must have had about 12 of them, but you know, when I came, I was always welcome. There was never too many.
What were some of the things you did with your cousins when you'd all get together?
Oh, we'd go outside and play and just talked, and there was not much to do because there were no games. Like if we went to town, maybe we walked up and down the street. And that's about all we did.
Do you remember any of the games you played?
Let me see. Oh, we jumped rope, and we played hopscotch, and I don't know, all kinds of stuff, and threw the ball over the house. Hide and seek, and ran around outside just to try to do whatever we could. We really had no games that we could play. We had nothing. We just made our own fun.
All right. Did your extended family ever get together for large gatherings? On holidays or anything?
My brothers and sisters, or
like your aunts and uncles and cousins? And
they only got together at weddings and funerals. There were never these birthday parties that they have now, that they have a birthday, 80th, 70th birthday. My mother was 75 years old until she had a party. My dad always had a birthday party. He had a birthday and a name's day party. Then we had a lot of people come. Then the aunts and uncles would come, and we had a house full, always on the 10th of August. And Mom complained one time. She said, you know, I always have to work and make a party for him. I've never had one. So that when she was 75, we made a party for her. My nephew built her a big cedar chest, and we filled it up with linens, like sheets and pillowcases and blankets and stuff. And she had it in her apartment in Bismarck until she passed away, and then my nephew gave it to his cousin. He said that she did such a wonderful job that she was entitled to this beautiful cedar chest that he built. And then, like I say, at Christmas and holidays, it was just the brothers and sisters that would come to Mom and Dad's. Like we would go to, to different places. And when my brother got married, they lived with us for a while. My oldest brother. They lived down the basement, and we were upstairs.
Right. Well, you've been talking a little bit about your parents. Can you tell me about your father? What was his name?
Lawrence Diesz.
What kind of person was he?
He was kind of a quiet person, and he never complained. The only time he ever complained, Ma said that she made hot water and put it in the coffee cup, forgot to put the instant coffee in. He said, I hate to complain, but I'd like a little color in my coffee. I never heard him complain at all. And the food was always, he never complained. But the only thing is, when he wanted to eat, we better not put the dishes down before he was ready to eat. Because once the dishes were on the table, Dad wanted to eat. But he never complained.
Right. Do you know when and where he was born?
He was born in Kendal, South Russia, on August the 10th, 1901.
Did you ever hear any stories about when he came over to the United States? Can you share some of them?
They came in through Eureka, South Dakota, and they settled down in Venturia. I think Dad was about 5. And what he said, then they got to Venturia, and there were so many rocks. And Grandpa went out and drove around and looked until he found a place that, I think only one big rock was on. That was west of Linton. And then he bought the land, and he sold the one at Venturia. He just couldn't handle these rocks. And then they moved west of Linton, and then my mother's brother lived west of Linton. And he took my dad along to Hillsview, and that's how he met my mother.
Right.
But he worked hard. He always had to help Grandpa yet, when they couldn't. We lived right next to him on the next farm. He always had to help up there when Grandpa couldn't handle it, and Uncle Joe, they couldn't handle it, so he always helped them. He was always helping.
How did he express his emotions? Like fear or love or anger?
He was just always had kind of a smile. So if he didn't smile, we knew it wasn't good. But no, he never really got angry. He just kind of smiled. I'm surprised, though, that he never said much. My mother did all the talking.
All right. Can you describe your relationship to your father?
I always had to work outside. I had to go out and help. My oldest brother got married, and then my oldest sister, she couldn't work outside. It made her nervous. So I had to go out and help haul hay and combine. They bought a big combine, and then I had to run the tractor in front of the combine. Or all those things. Everybody had to help, but I had to be out there all the time.
Okay. So your father was a farmer?
Mm-hmm.
How did he cope with hard times?
I don't know, he kind of accepted it. They had a lot of company. I suppose it wasn't easy when there was no money. And sometimes all they had was the cream check and the egg check, and there was no other money. And sometimes, I know when the roads got bad, he would take the horses.
All right. Can you tell me when, where, and how your father died?
He, let me see what happened to him. Oh, he had a heart attack at home. He died in the bathroom. They got up that morning and they went uptown and they went to the bank and did all their business. And then my mother had one cousin living in town. They stopped there a while, went home. Dad went to the bathroom, and all of a sudden she heard the water run, and he just fell over and he was dead. He kind of leaned on the faucet and that the water, he just kind of fell over. It was really a shock to my mother. But he had been having problems with his heart and everything.
When was that?
Let me see. It was September 22nd, 1982. He passed away.
All right. Can you tell me about your mother? What was her name?
Her name was Anna Mary.
Do you know when and where she was born?
She was born in Hillsview on May the 25th, 1902.
What kind of person was she?
Very outgoing. She made stuff out of nothing. The neighbors all thought we were rich and we were poor. Mom would take stuff apart and turn it inside out and make us coats and stuff. And in her house, she could just do things out of nothing. She would just make things and the people would come to the house and they just couldn't get over how nice she had everything. She took the couch apart and recovered it by herself. And she embroidered, and she was always busy. She was a little younger than my dad. So when it was time to carry the garbage out, Mom would say, "Dad, carry the garbage out." And then he'd say, "You're younger, I think you should do it." She was only a few months younger. This happened after we were all gone. And then my mother would laugh about it, and she said, "Yeah, Dad said I should carry it out, I'm younger."
Right? How did she express her emotions?
Well, she sure did. She was a talker. She never quit talking. I think that's why everybody knew her. She talked to everybody, and she just talked and talked. And
Go ahead.
no, that's okay.
Can you describe your relationship with her?
Well, we were always on good terms, and she always tried to do things, for us. Like she sewed clothes, and always, especially when I worked outside, she always worried, that, with running the tractor and the horses and stuff like that. I knew she didn't like it, but there was nobody else. I know when I had to take the horses back and forth from the thrashing machine, and they were kind of wild, she didn't like that. So we were always on good terms. I can never remember that we weren't.
Right. What was her profession?
She was a housewife. She kept the house going.
And how did she cope during the hard times?
Well, it was kind of hard for her. Especially, when, the two children died. And then my brother had a ruptured appendix. And when we said anything, my mother would say, "Don't complain. You haven't seen hard times yet." And because, it was hard for her. But then as we got older, we could help her. She was a perfectionist housekeeper. We scrubbed the kitchen every morning.
Did you always have to help with that?
Mm-hmm. Every Saturday, you know, we had a 2-story house. We went all the way around, cleaned all the windows and scrubbed everything, and everything was always ready for company. They had a lot of company. People would come there, and she was always glad when people came. I remember one day the priest stopped, and then all we had was macaronis, and my mother said, I'm going to invite you for dinner, but all we have is macaronis. He said, thank you. I'm so hungry. He said, nobody has invited me yet. He said, I'll eat macaronis. And that's all we had, and he thought it was pretty good.
Can you tell me when, where, and how she died?
She had oral cancer, and she died at St. Vincent's nursing home. She starved. She couldn't eat anymore. She was 98.5 years old, and there was just no hope for her. But she was in her apartment until a month before she died. My niece went there every morning and helped her. She would just make sure that Mom ate, and she had a little food chopper. She made sure Mom would eat, and they had hospice come in, and then she was ready to die, and then they called me. See, we were there on a Saturday, and then the nurses came in. I didn't have a chance to say goodbye to Mom, and then they called me on Tuesday. They can't figure out, she is so bad and hasn't died. Do you think she's waiting for somebody? Could it be you? And I said, well, it could be me. Then my niece took the phone, put it down by her, and then I talked to her, and they got a reaction. Finally, I said, put the phone down again. I said, Mom, if you go now, it's okay. Just like that, she died. They couldn't believe it. They had a write-up about it in the Bismarck Tribune, how she was hanging on. Well, I was going to say goodbye to her, and I never had a chance.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a few more questions about your family. Can you tell me which one of your parents influenced your life more, your mother or your father?
My mother.
You were closer to her?
Mm-hmm. Well, with teaching, you know, the housework and everything else. I mean, I did the work outside, but that's not what I was going to do forever.
Which one of your parents was stricter?
I think they both were. We never got to go anywhere. You know, I was 16 years old already, and we went to town once in a while on a Saturday night, and all we did, we walked up and down the street and waited for folks to go home. That's all we did. And I never drove a car until 1968. I never had a bicycle.
Right. Can you tell me what kinds of things your parents did for pastimes?
Oh, they were busy. They went to parties, and they played cards, and they even traveled. They went out to Oregon. My mother's brothers and sisters were living out there. They took the train out to Oregon. They did a lot of things, and they mostly played cards. I think our house was the party house. Everybody congregated there for some reason. Even though there was nothing to do, they all sat together and laughed and had a good time. So when my folks moved off the farm, my brother moved on, he said, you know what, it's still the party house. I have a names day in March, and he said, I got to have it 2 days, 1 day for the city people and 1 day for the farmers. That's how much. They had a lot of company. My parents had a lot of company in town, too. If at 3 o'clock nobody called my mother, she called somebody to come in and play cards. And by 5:30 they were there, and by 8:30, 9 o'clock, everybody left.
Did children ever get to come along for visits like that when you were growing up?
Children came to our house? Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what would you do while your parents visited or talked?
Well, they made us work. Well, they were upstairs. See, we had a front room upstairs. We called it in German the Stoop. And then they would sit around and visit, and then all of a sudden my mother would come and say, well, okay, you got to start supper now. So we peeled potatoes, and whoever came along, they helped too. Seemed the old people all got to sit around and visit, and then the young kids had to entertain them. They had to cook supper for them. So sometimes we went outside, we played ball, or when we were in the house, we just didn't do too much. I don't remember having toys.
So what kinds of things did you do for pastimes when you were growing up?
Oh, they kept us busy. In the evening, we had to cut, all kinds of material, like strings, and we had to hook rugs or crochet or embroider. My mother always had us crocheting. We only could listen to the radio for half an hour. Then the battery got low, and they had to take it to town and charge it up again. So we were always busy. My mother always had something for us to do. If it wasn't baking or something like that, in the evenings, we had to keep busy. And by that time, we were glad to go to bed. Just we were tired.
What did you listen to on the radio?
Oh, I just can't remember. I think it was, Jack Benny. And, I should remember what it was. The Shadow or something like that. All those real scary shows. They would be on every night, maybe for 15 minutes, and then we'd listen to them, and that was it.
All right. How many children did your parents have?
8.
Can you tell me their birth order?
Matt was the oldest. Then was Elizabeth, and then George, and then another Elizabeth, because the first Elizabeth died. There were 2 Elizabeths. We called the other one Betty. And then was me. Then was Katie. Then was Mike. And was Mary. Mary was the youngest. She still acts like she did when she was real little. We always said she was the baby, and she still, everything works for her. She's got 6 kids, and I think she acts younger than they do.
Right. Can you tell me about your brothers and sisters?
Well, my oldest brother, he had to work hard. And he went to the CC camp in Montana. And then they send the money home, and I think my folks got $20 a month from that. And he got married, and then they lived with us a while, and then he moved on to a farm by himself, and then he was supposed to go to the army, and he had left for good already. And then I went and stayed with my sister-in-law and the kids, and then finally he got to come back. And then Betty, she went to beauty school. She was a beautician. She always used to work on my hair, give me braids and stuff, and finally went to beauty school. I don't know, I didn't take up nothing. I graduated from the 8th grade when I was 12. I started when I was 7, graduated when I was 12. And then my parents were going to send me to high school. I started and I didn't like it. And then my sister Katie, she worked in a store, and she was a hot lunch cook then. And actually, I was closer to her than any the other ones. We made homemade root beer, and we sat in the trees down by Beaver Creek and drank our pop and stuff like that. So I was actually closer to her.
Do you remember how you made root beer?
Well, we had some extract, and we put it in the crock, and we put sugar in and yeast and stuff, and we left it set that long, and then we bottled it. And then we chilled it. I know my brother made ice cream one time when my parents were gone. We had Watkins liniment and Watkins vanilla. He went and put the liniment in instead of the vanilla. But we ate it anyway because we never got ice cream. It was a treat, so we ate the liniment ice cream.
So what kinds of mischief did you and your siblings get into?
Well, during the Christmas holidays, we had a attic upstairs yet from the main floor, and then my mother and my parents would buy cookies and candy, put it up there, and then they went and took the key and they hid it. And one time they left for the evening, and we couldn't find the right key, and then we got the wrong one stuck in the door. We just about bent that door up, and when they got home, my dad had to take the door off. We couldn't get it out anymore. That was bad. We just couldn't get in. We were going to eat some candy.
How were you disciplined for things like that?
I don't remember. I think we just didn't say nothing. We just stayed clear. We didn't do a thing anymore.
Right. Was there any competition between siblings when you were growing up?
Not really. Like my younger brother, he was like my dad. He was always quiet and nothing. He never complained about anything. But my youngest sister, you know, she was the baby. She had the run of the house. So there actually was no competition because we really didn't have anything, so there was nothing to compete for. The only thing is we had to share coats. I guess that sometimes if whoever wore the coat, who didn't wear, could wear the coat could go along for the evening, the other one had to stay home.
Did any of your siblings have nicknames?
No.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about your parents or your brothers and sisters?
I really can't think of anything except, you know, we always had a good time when we got together. I know Christmas time, you know, we always had a good time, and holidays. And other times we had a good time.
Well, why don't you tell me about holidays when you were growing up?
I just don't remember the first time we had a turkey. People talked about turkeys and we never had one. And my folks used to raise geese or ducks, and we lived by Beaver Creek. That one time our ducks got in the water. My dad went in and God, he got all muddy and dirty, and he went then and he shot him. He couldn't get him out. We never had any more ducks and geese after that. Well, we couldn't keep them. They'd go in the water and they'd leave. They'd join the wild ducks and geese. But we always had something for the holidays. My mother always had something. Like at Easter time, we always colored eggs. And we always had a good time.
What else do you remember about Easter when you were growing up?
Oh, we sometimes got new dresses for Easter, or shoes, dresses and shoes.
Were they store-bought dresses, or?
They came from the catalog.
What catalog?
Oh, the Elton's catalog, Spiegel, Penny's, Sears. We had a lot of catalogs. Or Mom would sew them.
Did you ever have to wear hand-me-down dresses?
Mm-hmm. I remember my mother used to be able to buy a material for 10 cents a yard, and she'd make things for us. Oh yeah, we wore a lot of hand-me-downs.
You mentioned getting new shoes. How often did you get new shoes?
Not too often. We usually only had a pair. I remember one time I had a pair of saddle shoes, and they were everyday shoes, dress shoes, good shoes. They were the only ones.
Right. What was your favorite holiday when you were growing up?
Christmas.
Can Can you tell me about Christmas?
Well, there was always candy and nuts and stuff. And years ago, they used to buy, you know, boxes of cookies, chocolate cookies and different kinds you couldn't get during the other time of the year. And we did get a lot of gifts, but we always got a little bag. They always made up apples and oranges and nuts and stuff like that. It was a big deal.
Did you have programs at school or church?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Can you tell me about them?
I enjoyed it. We always had to learn, and then they put curtains up at school, and at church, not that much. We didn't have that many programs in church. But I don't even remember. Some churches, you know, they got bags of stuff. I don't remember getting anything from the church at Christmas, but at school we always did.
Did you have a Christmas tree at your house?
We finally got one. It was a long time till we got one.
Do you remember when it was that you finally got one?
It must have been when I was about 15 or 16 we got a tree. I don't know where it came from, somewhere.
How did you decorate it?
Oh, my mother bought the tinsel and all that stuff and put it on. We had a few little bulbs we hung on. We didn't have a lot of stuff. I don't think we had electricity then. No, we didn't.
Did you believe in Santa Claus?
For a while I did. Somebody always dressed up and came in and scared us.
Scared you?
Mm-hmm.
Dressed up like Santa Claus?
Well, worse than that. Not like a Santa Claus, much worse. I suppose they tried to scare you for the whole year. So if you didn't do anything the way you were supposed to, then they'd say, well, Santa Claus is going to get you. And that always worked. Nowadays, it doesn't work anymore.
So did you believe in an Easter bunny?
Mm-mm. No.
Okay. Is there anything else you remember about Christmas when you were growing up?
Not really.
Okay. Did your family celebrate the 4th of July?
Oh, yes.
Can you
That
tell
was
me?
a big day. We had to hoe the garden, the watermelon patch, the potato patch, and then we maybe got 10 cents, and then we got to go along for the 4th of July. And my mother would take her supplies. She would have a dish towel and a knife. That was her supplies for the picnic at Seaman Park. Then they'd buy a watermelon and sliced bread and some minced ham, and Mom would make sandwiches and slice up the watermelon. And then we had to go over to the water fountain and drink water. And then they had races. You'd run races, and sometimes you get a few pennies. The men pulled ropes, the women took care of the kids, and that was 4th of July. We had a good time all the time. We went down to the park by Linton. But we had to hoe the potatoes and the watermelons and all that stuff.
Did you ever get firecrackers?
I don't remember. Mm-mm. I remember it. I know I've seen firecrackers, but I don't think we ever got any. Not as far as I know. Mm-mm.
Right. Did your family celebrate Thanksgiving?
Yes.
Can you tell me about Thanksgiving?
Thanksgiving was a pretty big day for us, and my mother had made chicken for years, and then finally, you know, we got turkey. But yeah, we had Thanksgiving.
How about New Year's Eve and New Year's?
New Year's Eve, let me see. I think they always celebrated it. Some people came out and they shot the New Year with the shotguns. But I mean, we didn't. My parents, they celebrated with their friends.
Do you remember any other holiday celebrations when you were growing up?
We should have celebrated Valentine's Day because my brother was born on Valentine's Day. See, I was born on St. Patrick's Day.
Did you celebrate it?
Not really. Not until I was older. I was, I don't know, maybe 18 already before I even had a birthday party. Some of the gals came and had a birthday party, and that's all I remember. I don't know, my folks never, that we had cakes and things like that, you know, for birthdays.
How about names days?
My dad always celebrated his name's day. That was a big celebration at our house. We had a house full of people. Food, drinks.
Did anybody else celebrate their name's day in your family?
No. My brother did. Matt, the oldest one. His name's day's in March. Yeah, he celebrated. I don't remember my mother celebrating her name's day. No.
Okay. Did your family do anything for Halloween?
No. Mm-mm.
Did you do anything at school for Halloween or Valentine's Day?
Yeah, we always made things in school, like we made hearts and stuff like that. And Halloween, I don't think they celebrated too much in school, not that I know of.
Right. Is there anything else you remember about celebrations when you were growing up?
Weddings.
Can you tell me about weddings?
Usually if there was a wedding in the neighborhood, one of us had to go along and work in the kitchen all day and all night. That I remember. It was always a big day. I didn't even care if I didn't go along because I had to work all day.
Were there dances?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, dances. They had church in the morning and then they came back around noon and then they had soup, and the evening meal they had sausage, but at that time they had butchered a pig and made sausage, and the afternoon meal they had butchered chickens and made soup and stuff like that.
Do you remember anything else about weddings when you were growing up?
I remember when our neighbor lady got married, and we just lived up, they lived down the hill and we were up the hill, and then their oldest, the neighbor's youngest daughter came, but the oldest one got married and my mother had to cook for that wedding. So we just sat on the hill all day and watched, and they were out, and sometimes they were walking around the yard, and we wished we would have been there. And weddings were fun. Everybody got together at weddings.
Right. Are there any other celebrations you remember when you were growing up?
Not really. I know nowadays when they get confirmed, it's a big celebration. We never had any. I never had any when we had confirmation or anything.
Right. Can you tell me about where you went to school when you were growing up?
I went to South Prairie School District, west of Linton. And I walked 3 miles to school.
Did you always have to walk?
As a rule, yes, we walked. Oh, once in a while we got a ride. My dad, you know, in the wintertime he would, you know, hitch up the horses and give us a ride. As a rule, we walked. It was pretty cold sometimes. Couldn't feel my hand and feet anymore. We didn't have clothes like they have now. We just had, I think, jeans or whatever we had. And I think we had some of the first hot lunch there was. Our teacher told us each to bring a potato. And she put a lid on the ash pan and put them in, you know, in the stove. And by the time it was noon, we had hot potato. We didn't have butter or salt or pepper, but we thought that was pretty good.
What else would you bring for lunch?
Syrup sandwiches in a syrup pail. My brother made a mistake one day. he grabbed the wrong pail. He ended up in school with syrup. And then the kids felt sorry for him, and they kind of gave him a little sandwich or whatever to eat because he had to go 3 miles and he only had syrup. See, we had those big gallon syrup pails. And so all I remember, we had syrup bread. See, and because my mother was so talented in fixing everything up, people thought we were rich. We never got no commodities. Other kids would come with oranges and apples, so we didn't have any. See, we were poor and people thought we were rich. Can you believe that?
How many students were at your school?
Oh, we had about 14 or maybe 18. Because there was one big family that lived close by.
Were they mostly boys or mostly girls?
Oh, about half and half, I would say. Half boys and half girls. The highlight of the school year was that once a night we could go home with our girlfriends. You know, we went to their house overnight. That was our vacation. See, then I didn't have to milk that night. We always milked by hand. When we came home, we had to do chores. So we had a vacation. And I usually went to the place where I think they had 12 or 14 kids. So you always had a good time there. We always had fun there.
All right. Can you tell me about some of the teachers you had at school?
They were all real good. I really liked them.
Were they men or women?
I remember we had 2 men and the rest were women. But a lot of times they came back the following year. We didn't change teachers that often.
Was this a one-room schoolhouse?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What was the attendance situation like at your school?
Well, the kids came pretty regular. I couldn't say that they didn't come. I never had a perfect attendance. Because when the weather was awful bad, I couldn't go. We couldn't go.
Were there children of different ethnic backgrounds in your school?
No. Mm-mm. We were all German.
Were you allowed to speak German in school?
Yeah, we talked German, but when the teacher didn't hear it.
Were you disciplined for speaking German in school?
No. Mm-mm.
What subjects were you taught?
Well, we had arithmetic and English. Arithmetic, English, geography, and penmanship and all. I just can't remember civics or whatever. But I had no problem in school. I opened the book up and I don't think I even learned. I didn't even study.
What was your favorite subject?
I think reading. I like to read. I liked them all. Didn't matter. I liked the arithmetic or anything.
Right. So, did you have a lot of homework?
No. Mm-mm. I don't remember taking books home. And if I took a book home, it's very seldom that I took a book home.
Did your school have a library?
Yes. It was right in the school, but we had a place, you know, on the wall where you could open the doors and had a lot of books in it. I read a lot of the books that they had there.
Do you remember any of them?
No, I don't.
Did you have a favorite book when you were growing up?
Not really. I can't remember. Was Little Women a book then already? Did they have that out?
I think so.
Books like that I like to read.
Did you ever get in trouble at school?
Not that I remember. I suppose I was late all the time because we had to milk the cows and help with the chores, and then by the time we ran over the last hill, the bell rang. We could never make it on time, as hard as we tried.
How did children get disciplined in your school if they stepped out of line?
I suppose they had to stay in. They couldn't go out for recess. They had to stay in. I'm sure that's what it was. I remember some boys, they went and they put a tax on the teacher. We had a man teacher, and they put tax on the chair, and he sat in it. He wasn't very happy about it. I don't think anybody went out for recess that day. So he got the right people.
What kinds of things did you do at recess?
Oh, we played ball. That's usually what we did. Or we played tag, and we just ran around. I don't remember if we had swings or not. I just don't remember that. If we had swings that we could swing on or something like that. But we ran around outside. We were just glad to be out when the weather was nice. I don't know. I don't think when the weather was bad, I don't think we went out.
Do you remember what you did for recess if you couldn't go outside?
I don't think we did anything. Just had to be quiet and not tear the school apart.
Is there anything else you want to share with us about your grade school? What's your favorite memory from going to school?
I think getting to school on time. That was always a joke. We just couldn't get there on time. I think once in a while we did. We ran a little faster. And you know, I'm still used to walking. I don't start the car. If I go way out to the grocery store, if I can carry it, I'll carry it. But if I can't, then I drive. But people think I don't have a driver's license. I do. Just because I walk all the time. Like, I walk up to the drugstore, it's only a block and a half, and I walk to church, it's a block and a half. But the store is quite a ways. But I walk out there, and then I think I drove one time and people thought I didn't have a license. They thought the cops should pick me up. But I do have a license. But how much more can you save when you walk, right? I mean, I always walked. I had just about it when we were in Linton that I worked downtown. I had close to a mile. We kind of lived way out. And even on a blizzard morning, if I had to go to work at 5, I just took a blanket, put it over my head, and I walked to work. No problem.
Right. Was getting an education important to your family?
Yes. They didn't like it because I quit high school. Because I was so young yet. I was only 12. And the reason I think I quit, I was staying, my grandpa remarried and they were staying in town. I didn't like it there. And when I wanted transportation back and forth, I always went with the mailman. That was my taxi. A lot of people, you know, the mailman would come and they'd ride with the mailman where they wanted to go. And I'm sure right now you couldn't do it anymore. It would be against the law.
Why didn't you like high school?
Because, I don't know, it was so big when I got there. I couldn't find my way around. And then they had like the gyms, and in the gym they exercise and stuff. I had never heard of it. You know, and then they played basketball and things like that. And we never got to town or anything. I just never heard of what, you know, when they were. The best thing I liked when I went to high school was general science. That was my favorite subject. And we all agreed there was life on the moon.
Right. How long did you go to high school?
About a year. I wish I would have finished. But my older sister didn't go to high school either, but she wrote a test and she went to college. And she did real well. My brother was a college graduate. He helped her. And didn't have high school and went to college in Bismarck. And she had a state job. She was a payroll clerk for the National Guard. the one that went to beauty school after she, I guess it didn't pay too well.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about your education when you were growing up?
Well, I wished I would have finished high school. I really do. I think I could have went places if I would have, but I didn't. I was too young when I graduated. I took 2 classes in 1 year. You know, I wrote the 7th grade, and then I said, well, should I write the 8th grade? Well, if you want to. My older sister wrote the 8th grade, and I had better grades than she did. But it was okay.
All right. Well, let's switch over a little bit. And can you tell me how important religion was to you when you were growing up?
Very.
How often did your family attend church?
At least every Sunday. We always had a gate to open up, and I had to open it. I don't care how dressed up I was and the wind was blowing, I had to go out and open that gate. So I knew I did it every Sunday. And one Sunday we drove home from church, and my older sister leaned against the door and fell out on her face. Oh, she had a bad face. That was bad. So we went every Sunday, but then during Lent and Advent, we went more often. And years ago during Advent and Lent, you didn't go to dances or anything. We didn't eat, like during Lent, we didn't eat meat at all. That was fish.
Can you tell us about the church building that you attended?
That was a beautiful building. My dad helped build that. That was built in the 1920s, I would say, the late 1920s. Really, it's really nice. It's a beautiful building. They remodeled it. It's so nice. And I still can't get over how they got that way up, you know, the cross way up. And they never had no, you know, they have to have those steels to lift it up. I think they had scaffolds. They built scaffolds all the way around. Yeah, it's a beautiful building.
When you went to church, did you sit with your family?
No. The kids all had to sit up front. The old people sat in the back, and if you moved, they knew about it. The reason the old people sat in the back, to keep track of the kids. See, and the women sat on one side and the men sat on one side. We always had to wear a hat or a shawl on our heads. We never went without anything on our heads.
Was there a specific reason for always having your head covered?
That's what they did. They must have had a reason. I don't know.
What were some of the religious activities that you participated in when you were growing up?
Not really that much. But the only thing I can think of when they had their fundraiser, the church fair, my mother would leave for a few, I didn't even see her for a few days. The women all went in and cooked and got everything done, and then we were in charge of the house. And then in the evening, my dad would take us along in. Just, I suppose, to keep us out of mischief. We had to go along in, and Mom had to work in the kitchen. She was always the one that made the coffee. Well, they had their Bible school, you know, the Bible school every year and stuff like that that we went to.
Can you tell me about Bible school?
Well, you had to learn everything. You're supposed to memorize everything. I still I still kind of know everything. Not everything, a lot.
Were you confirmed?
Yes.
Can you tell me about like confirmation classes?
Well, you learned a little more than you did, you know, to begin in the other classes. But yeah.
Can you describe your confirmation ceremony?
It was very nice. And I picked this one gal, our neighbor gal, that, you know, I thought she was always nice to us. And I picked her, and she's been our friend. She and her husband are still our friends. And then when they had their 50th wedding anniversary, people couldn't believe why we were invited. She's my confirmation sponsor.
Did your family have a celebration afterwards?
No. Mm-mm. The only celebration I remember is my dad's name's day and birthday. Otherwise, I don't remember celebrations, except for the holidays. That's about all.
When you were growing up, were you able to question religious teachings?
No. Mm-mm.
Did your parents restrict anything because of your religious beliefs?
Not really, no. Mm-mm.
On Sundays, was dinner different than other days of the week?
Yes. Sundays was always jello and cake and chicken noodle soup. We always butchered the chicken on Saturday, baked the cake, and made it jello. We had no refrigerator, but we had a shallow well in the house. And then we would take a pail and a rope and we'd hang it down there. And it was always cool down there. And then by Sunday we had jello. It gelled down there. And then my dad, we were by Beaver Creek. And my dad, they would go out and cut blocks of ice out of the creek. And then we had it was like a cellar and had a top on it with straw. They would put the ice blocks in there and cover them with straw. And that's where we would put our cream and eggs to keep them cool, to take them to town and sell them, because you just couldn't have them set in the hot weather. So we had that little space.
Right. So at your church, was the German language used, or was it English?
English. We'd had English. My oldest brother was German, and we were English.
How did your family view people of other faiths?
We got along real well. We had people of different faiths that lived close by. Our close neighbors were Baptists. They were real good friends to my parents. And then a little ways away, they were Lutherans. And my youngest sister married one of them. And then after they moved to Rapid City and had 6 children, and then he joined the Catholic Church. And then, some of the son-in-laws weren't Catholic that the girls married. And then my brother-in-law talked them into joining the Catholic Church. See, after he joined the church and then in Rapid City, he said, these lights aren't good enough. We got to put in better lighting in the church, and he was in charge of getting the money. And then they remodeled the kitchen, and he has done so much in that church. It's just unreal. So they got along real well. We had, like I say, we had people of all faiths living around us.
Right. Is there anything else you'd like to add about religion when you were growing up?
Well, they were so strict. I think when I went to church, I was so nervous all the time. I had a headache. I had a headache when I went in and I left. I always, everybody wanted to act so you're afraid to cough.
Were children disciplined for not being still during
Mm-hmm.
church?
You got to hear about it later on. That's more or less why we were nervous.
Is there anything else you'd like to share about church or religion when you were growing up?
I don't think so.
All right then. Can you describe for me the house that you grew up in?
Well, I grew up in a newer house than this. My grandfather built my parents a new farm. They had to pay for it eventually, but we had all new buildings on the farm, except maybe one or two. We had a new house, yeah. My mother had a new house, and that's why, you know, she could fix it up so nice. And I think we were about the only ones that had a furnace in the house. We only had two old buildings, and one old building, a horse, we were missing a horse one day, and we just couldn't find it. Then my brother walked over, opened the door here, this skinny horse is standing in there. It had been lost for days. Went in, and the wind blew the door shut. But we had a two-story house. We had a real nice house.
Can you kind of walk us through the rooms in your house?
Well, as we came in, one stairway went down and one went up. It looked like a split level, you know, when you look at them now. And then you went to the upstairs, and then there was a room that in the winter time we lived there, we used that as a kitchen. And then it had 3 bedrooms on that side, and then they had a big front room. And when you went downstairs, it had a big kitchen. That's where we fed the thrashers when they thrashed. And then over here was a room where that well was in, and they had the stove in there. And then we had another place where the furnace was in. My mother always whitewashed it, and then we washed our hands and stuff in there. We used it for a washroom. Yeah, she had a nice house. Newer than what I've got.
Can you tell us what sleeping arrangements were like?
Well, that was a tough deal. Because the bedrooms were small. We had a bed, and then 2 would lay this way, two would lay this way, and one had to lay across this way. 3 of us. My oldest sister always laid like this across this way, and then this way. Then when Grandma came, then they put another little bed in there. The Grandma was there with us yet too. And then my brothers, they had that other bedroom, and then my folks slept up here. And God, there was no room for clothes. Well, we didn't have any. And then we had like a radiator for hot water, and we made ourselves a piece of wood on top, and then we put like a little skirt around there, pretended it was a dresser in the summertime. In the wintertime, we couldn't use it because it was hot. The radiator got hot.
Right. Can you tell us about taking baths when you were growing up?
Well, it wasn't the easiest. We have a wash tub, and then we'd go in that washroom. We'd have to carry water in and heat it up, and really the wash tub was only like this. But then we'd go out in the tank sometimes, or down the creek. My brother always went down the creek. Him and his friends, they always swam around Beaver Creek. They were swimmers. I never swam around there. I didn't like the water. So we had a round tub. That was our bathtub.
Did you have to share the water?
Mm-hmm.
Was there an order of people who got to go first?
Well, whoever got there first.
How often did you take baths?
Well, in the summertime, at least once a week. That was a Saturday thing. We washed our hair and took baths and did all that. You worked outside all day. You should have taken one every day. But I went out in the tank a lot of times. We had a big tank there, and you know, the water got warm, and you just go in and wash yourself. Even if you had some clothes on, what was the difference?
Right. Go ahead.
My mother said it really didn't matter years ago if you didn't take a bath, and then nobody else did either. It was the same. She said she didn't want to do that, but she said if you didn't, the other people didn't either. It's not It wasn't the right thing.
How often did you brush your teeth when you were growing up?
Very seldom. I don't remember owning a toothbrush for a long time.
All right. Did your mother have a garden when you were growing up?
Big garden. We had a big garden at home. We had one by the house and one down the creek. See, we had like a spring that ran down there, and we detoured the water in there. Then out in the field we had another big one because there was no money to buy anything. And then we had a cornfield close to home. We'd go out with a wheelbarrow. My mother would can corn. She sometimes had 80, 90 quarts corn, just corn. And then cucumbers. We had barrels full, and watermelons, barrels. My dad would buy grapes, and he had barrels of wine. Boy, our cellar was full. And then, I think we sometimes had at least a wagon box full of potatoes, because they never bought any of that. So when we got company, we always had something to serve, even if it was potatoes and corn.
You mentioned that your father would buy grapes. Then did he make his own wine?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember
Very
how?
good. Well, he kind of soaked them. He had a wooden barrel, and he would soak them, and I think he put sugar on them, or I don't know how he really, I don't think he put yeast on them. I don't think so. He used to make beer, too, and whiskey. They made all that own, and we made our own butter. Sometimes we didn't have a churn, and then we took the syrup pail and we went like this and knocked it on our knee, and pretty soon we had butter. Because I think all they ever did, they went to town and bought flour and sugar and salt. We had our own lard, the shortening. Yeah, they had everything. Then they butchered hogs, and they made sausage, and we canned sausage, and then they had beef and chicken, and we just had everything.
Can you tell us about like a typical butchering day when you were growing up?
You'd get up early in the morning, and they'd butcher the pig, and then they'd scald it, and then they'd hang it up in the barn, and then they'd scrape it, and they'd take out the insides. And then after it kind of chilled a little bit, then they would bring it, we would do it downstairs in the house. And then they'd bring it in and cut it all up. And then they had to turn the grinder. Oh, God, grind. Turn the handle and turn. All of a sudden you'd step on a little grease, and all of a sudden you didn't have any more footing to turn the grinder. That was as bad as the wash day, when you had to go like this with the washing machine. But the stuff was good. My mother canned a lot. So when people came, we just went and opened the jar and had all our own stuff.
What were some of your favorite meals?
I like dumplings, vegetable soup, chicken soup. I like the Jell-O. And bread. My mother made the best homemade bread.
Did you have any least favorite foods?
I'm sure I did. My sister couldn't eat onions at all. She didn't like them at all. She got sick from them. But I think I ate everything. I don't remember eating nothing that I didn't eat. My brother liked homemade bread with sugar on. He went in the service, and he was with the paratroopers. The first time he came home from furlough, they never had a way to come home. They had no money. He had to hitchhike. So he walked in the house. He never even said hello. Had been gone all that time, and walked in, and the mom had made fresh bread, and he walked over and took some fresh bread, put sugar on it, ate it, and we finally got to talk to him after he ate his fresh bread. We got such a kick out of it, and we thought he must have really missed her bread.
Right. What were some of the traditional German foods that your mother made?
Oh, she made nepfla and dumplings, soup noodles, they called them. I can't. Noodles and prunes. She would make, take eggs and make noodles. She didn't have the regular noodle cutter. We would roll them out real good, and she had a little deal where she would run through it, and then we'd get noodles. She would cut noodles and stuff like that. She made a lot of stuff, like bread and cake. The cake, we never had a chance to frost it. We would just whip up a cake, and boy, when we came home from school or any place and the cake was still warm, we just devoured it. No, no time for frosting.
All right. Is there anything else you remember about food when you were growing up?
Well, there was a lot of good food. There was bachenda, it's pumpkin turnovers and sour watermelons and all that. The night before we got married, my mother had a barrel of watermelons in the downstairs, and she said, I think those watermelons are stinking or smelling real strong. So the night before I got married, I had to go and carry out the sour watermelons, and I threw them out way out in the garden. And then, they had turned soft, and they were kind of smelling. She said, got all these people coming to the house, and these watermelons, you better carry them out. So I did. So my mom made a real nice chicken dinner for our wedding. That's all we had. We had to butcher the chickens the day before. There was no worrying about getting a hairdo or something like that, or how are your nails.
All right. Do you remember when your family got electricity?
When we moved to Montana. I don't remember it on the farm. And they moved out there, and it was either 1947 or 48 that we had electricity. And we also had natural gas out there. My sister went over and turned the oven on and didn't light it. She went over with the match, and she lost her eyebrows and everything. It just knocked her back against the wall. And I said, what did you do? Well, I just turned it on a little while. I said, if you turn the gas on, you better light it. Boy, she didn't have any eyelashes or eyebrows left. Front of her hair were gone. But made bang, and she just went back against the cupboard. See, we never had that on the farm. We had kerosene.
How did that change your life?
It did. We didn't have to clean the chimneys on the lights anymore, and they didn't tell us we had to turn them down because kerosene was either 5 or 10 cents a gallon. You can't, we had the lights up. Oh, they're too bright. You better turn them down. Save kerosene. And it was better. And we had a shower in Montana too. We had a nice house. My folks bought a nice house. We had a shower and everything.
Why did your family move to Montana?
They just decided to have a change of scenery. And my brother was either going to move away, do something else, and he really wanted to farm, and then they moved off the farm, and they let my brother go on the farm. And they went out in the world. My mother did housework over there. My dad worked construction, building the oil refinery in Montana, Billings, Montana. I went to work as a waitress, and the other kids went to school.
Do you remember when your family got its first car?
No, I think they had a car when I was born. My mother had never had a driver's license, and she would take the car and put us on the car and drive us to Hillsview from Linton. I think we went about 50 miles that she even knew the way. And I think there were just little cow paths that she even got there. I just can't believe it. And then one time we had a little better car, and my mother was going to back it out of the garage, and she took the wall along. And we thought, Dad's going to be mad tonight if he never was. So we just took the hammer, we kind of knocked the fender out, and we pushed the wall back in and painted it up. And to this day, to the day he died, he didn't know that wall was out. We were pretty good about it. We pushed it back and we painted it again.
Right. Do you remember your family getting a telephone?
When we moved to Montana. And to this day, nobody wants to answer the phone. The telephone rings and he doesn't want to answer it and I don't either because I'm not used to a telephone. No, we never had a phone. Until we moved to Montana, then we got a telephone.
Right. How did that change your life?
Not really. I never used it. I never made use of the telephone. I never called anywhere. I still don't. I don't call too much unless I have to call my brothers and sisters or friends or whatever.
All right. Can you tell me about some of the chores you did as a child?
Mm-hmm. I was usually the first one out, and I had when the weather was nice, I had to go out and get the cows, the milk cows. Put them in the barn, and then the rest would come to milk. And then I turned the separator. And if I let the handle go, I had to stop the whole thing to, and then we fed the calves, and there were a lot of chores to do.
How many cows did your family have?
Oh, we milked about 16.
What other animals did you have on your farm?
Horses, pigs, chickens. We had ducks, but they're gone.
Were there any chores you particularly liked doing?
That I liked doing? I really didn't mind it. I didn't like to get the cows too well because we had rattlesnakes. I always thought, gosh, now I have to walk out in the grass and there might be a rattlesnake out there and all that stuff. But I always got by. I guess they were scared of me too, and I was scared of them. And I was out shocking grain one day, oats, and we had they bindered it, and then there was some loose stuff. I went like this, and I picked up a rattlesnake. And I knew I heard it rattle so loud, and then I dropped it, and I ran home, and I said to my brother, "I'm not going out there shocking again until you kill that snake." And he said, "Oh, there's no snake out there." He went out, there was a big one there, he killed it. I had picked it up and just about bit me in the face. That was a bad experience. So, and then we had to go out and pick choke cherries and make jam, and then we hauled hay. I know my brother and I, we were out one time, he threw the hay up and I was up, straightening out the box, and then he was going to come up and this horse jumped ahead and took the reins out of my hand, and then he was standing in the front and he jumped on the horse, to save the day. And then as we went over a bump, the hay went up and I fell down. I fell into the hay and the forks went down beside me. Oh, we had some terrible experiences. And then I had to run the tractor to pull the hay up to the hay loft, and the rope tore. And I was just ready to go down the creek. I got so excited I just about forgot to brake the tractor. I mean, those are things I had to help with. And we went out in the fields, like when we headered, I had to run the horses with the box, and then after they covered me up, I couldn't see the header anymore, and I didn't know how far I was this way or that way, because I had to stay a certain distance away.
Did you ever have to help during threshing?
I had to run the horses back and forth with the grain from the threshing machine to the yard. And I had some wild horses. Boy, I'll tell you, when I came out there, then somebody would back the wagon up to the threshing machine, and then I held the horses. And you know, when they put the pipe up like that, the horses jumped and they ran. They knew it already, and they wouldn't stop until we came home to the shed there, to where my dad was with the elevator. And then he'd back him around, and you know, he took the back end out of the wagon to put it into the grain. And when he snapped the last one, the horses were gone. I mean, I was on there. I better be ready to go. So that's what I did. I had to run the horses back and forth from the threshing machine because there was nobody else really. And then one day when we had the threshers, we always had to get up early in the morning to feed them. We had a bunch of them. And then we were hurrying, trying to fry the sausage, and then that squirted out, and I went by and I fell on my crazy bone, and I thought, oh, I'm going to die. I went out to serve the threshers, and I went like this with my arm, and it cracked back in, and I fainted. Then my dad looked over. She's always got a habit like that, and I was laying there unconscious. Oh, so the guys, they were in shock. See what happened? I knocked my crazy bone, and then I straightened my arm, and I couldn't handle it. I just passed out. Oh, I went through a lot of stuff. And one time I forgot to get up to get the cows, and we had a little pipe, and my mother pounded on the pipe. It scared me so much I jumped up and twisted my neck out of place. And then I was going to go downstairs, and I passed out and I fell downstairs. And I couldn't do anything anymore. Then they had a minister over, no, a doctor, some kind of a quack doctor. Then my brother had no driver's license. He had to hold, my mother and I and my brother came over here, and they took me to that place. And then this guy kept going like this and this, and he said, just relax. He took this and it cracked my neck. I thought it was going to die. And then he went, you're okay now. Then he cracked it again. He put it in place. I jumped up that my neck was out of place. That's doing chores.
All right. How about inside chores?
Well, in the house, you know, we'd scrub floors and things like that. My sister more or less did the inside job because she couldn't handle what I was doing outside. She was maybe more or less the one, she did the sewing. She and my mother did the sewing and the baking. My sister could bake just anything and it looked very good. But then sometimes I got to stay in the house too and cook a little bit. I didn't want to go outside all the time. And we had to wash clothes, and I had to go with this washing machine with this handle and just keep going. Wash day was bad. And my mother would make homemade soap. We had homemade soap. She used lard and lye. That's what she would put in, and then she had something else that looked kind of blue, and I can't remember what that was, Boraxo or something like that. Then she'd make chunks, and then she'd kind of chip them up, and we had to heat the water. You know, when it was hot outside, we had to put fire in we heated it on the cook stove. We had to bring cow chips in or corn cobs or something like that. We used to drive out with a wheelbarrow and bring a load of cow chips in to heat the water.
Were there any chores that you really disliked having to do?
Well, I think picking up cow chips, I didn't like that. Or doing running the washing machine with my, you know, you having going like this all the time. And I really didn't like to iron. We had to put our irons on the stove and heat them up. Because sometimes, you know, my mother ironed everything. The dish towels, sheets, everything she ironed. So sometimes the iron was a little hot because you had it setting on the stove. You didn't know how hot it was, and then you'd get a little brown. You'd burn it a little bit. I never liked ironing.
Were there any differences between winter chores and summer chores?
Oh, yes. Winter chores, I had to go out in the barn and help clean the barn. Where in the summertime we didn't have that problem. Or I'd have to go up in the hay loft and put the hay down for the cattle and the horses. I had to do that and, you know, clean the barn out, stuff like that. Because my brother got married and those other two had died, and my older sister couldn't handle it. She got sick, and I said I couldn't see that she would be sick all the time. She'd go outside and work, and she was just. I know I had to run the tractor and the combine, and then I said, "Well, you run it one day, and I'll do the next." She went on one round, and she was just shaking. You can't put anybody on like that, so I just sat out there and run the tractor.
Were you ever hired out to work for a neighbor or a relative?
Mm-hmm. I worked 2 months and I got $2.50 total. That was my first job. I didn't even get any clothes. See, when they brought me home, then my mother said, "Well, I think that's a little too cheap, $1.25 a month. You had all these cows to milk and 2 kids to take care of. For 2 months, you know, $1.25 a month." Then they said, well, she had to eat too, and my mother said, "Well, I've got enough food here yet for her." That is not right. You know, $1.25 a month when you have to work. I used to get up early in the morning until late at night we had to work. Take care of the kids, the washing and the milking the cows and helping to prepare the meals and stuff like that. Oh yeah, I had a job. My first job.
All right. Can you tell me what a typical winter was like when you were growing up?
Cold. We had a lot of snow. And usually when it started snowing, you know, my dad didn't take the car out anymore. He went with the wagon. But then a lot of times, you know, he would go across the fields with the wagon. If he thought we could drive with the car, then he would go with the car. Or if Mom and Dad would go to town and do their shopping, like when, you know, winter was really cold, they'd put a stone into the stove, into the, you know, where the oven, the cook stove, and heated it up and put it on the sled. And then Dad had straw, and they had straw and hay on there. Because they got to town, they had to feed the horses. They tied them up someplace, and then Mom they sat there with that warm stone, and they were warming themselves, and they had blankets over their heads, and then they went in shopping. I know if I had a nickel extra, I would send it along and told them I wanted an orange. They would bring it. They always thought about it. They brought it. So a typical winter, I don't know. We crocheted a lot of rugs. If you had old stockings or anything old, my mother made us cut little strips.
Right. Did you ever feel isolated during the winters?
Not really. Because we went to school and we always had company. Somebody always came through with the horses. I remember my uncle they came one time, and then we had a little step downstairs. He came in, carried the blankets, and he missed the step and rolled right into the kitchen with the blankets. Yeah, they laughed about it. They thought it was fun. No, I never felt isolated out there. I didn't. One Sunday morning, you know, when it was so cold and snow was blowing, my mother sat in the car with the kids. Dad just didn't come and didn't come. And finally he came out, and then she said, "Well, what were you doing?" "Well, somebody decided to get married and I was best man." "Well, then come out and tell me." Here there's a wedding and Mom didn't know about it. So he was best man in there. We were sitting out there freezing. And then later on, I think they went to Strasbourg. They had a little party in Strasbourg. My folks went there. And then they couldn't get home. And it was a good thing my brother knew what to do. He put coal on the furnace so we wouldn't freeze. They were really worried that time. They took their life in their hands, and us too. Mom said later on she was so glad they got home because the weather was not good, but they went over because my dad was best man.
All right. Can you describe a typical spring for us?
Well, you know what a typical spring was? We were lived by Beaver Creek, and the creek would get so high. That was always scary. And then we had a place not far from our place where we could go across the bridge. And that went over that bridge, and sometimes it was so washed out that we sometimes would go over that and take a shortcut, and then we had to go all the way around when the water got so high. But then springtime was always fun. You know, they got everything ready. We had to go and get seed ready, and then we had to turn the seed cleaner by hand. That was a job. It was always cold out there, and you had cold feet, and we had to clean that many bushels, and we'd just turn and turn, and then this thing would just, you know, clean. And then we had a deal where we run the corn cobs through, and we had to turn that so we got corn, seed corn. And in the fall, we also always made our own seed, like watermelons and cucumbers and all this stuff. It was all laying upstairs on paper. Then we would take it all off of the newspaper, and we would just kind of get it ready to put out in the garden. Mom never bought plants. We always had our own. Everything, there was no plants buying or seed or anything. You had everything yourself. But I like spring. I was glad winter was over with.
Right. What was summer like?
Busy. That's usually, you know, when we had to work out in the fields. You know, they made hay. I remember one time my dad was out raking hay, and all of a sudden, here he comes walking. And what happened? The horses ran away with him with the rake, and he fell off backwards. He was lucky that he didn't fall in and get rolled. And I don't know how long it took, and then they caught the horses. So there was always something to do, and then we had to clean the house. My mother, I think she painted every year. She always got the house ready. Yeah, I was going to tell you that one spring, you know, I was going to, you know, put some fire into the cook stove so we could bake bread. And what happened? I had the dampers open, and the wind came up and took the fire through into the chimney. And the chimney started burning. It was a good thing my dad and my brother were home. They had to climb up on the deal. They put salt in. They couldn't kill the fire. And finally, we had a fire brigade running. And the water, my mother had we had cleaned all the basement and painted everything. And that soot just ran in. That was tough. Then my mother said she didn't mind it as long as she still had her house. So that was quite an experience.
Right. Then can you tell us about fall?
I liked fall. That's usually when we picked the corn, and then we had to go and take the, you know, that off of the corn. And then a lot of times we saved some because my folks had maybe one or two mattresses where then my dad would drive up with the wagon, and we had to fill them mattresses. They were kind of a striped color, and then put that in and get everything ready. I liked fall. It was nice.
So which was your favorite season?
I think summer. I like summer the best.
Why was it your favorite?
I don't know, because we had the 4th of July. We could go to the park. I remember one summer we were in town, and my brother had a little job, and they had what was it, the merry-go-round or the something in town. And then he came over and he said that he would pay our tickets. I think it was 10 cents a piece. So we all got to go on, the 3 of us, we got to go on the merry-go-round. That was a treat. So he must have had a big job. I bet he made at least $2.
All right.
There was always things to do.
Okay. We're gonna switch gears just a little bit. Can you tell me anything you remember about the dirty 30s?
Yeah, I can. The wind and the dust and how the fences looked. The fences were just covered. There was just nothing. You know, there was just all dust and, we had to go out too and haul thistles. And my feet, got all them stickers in my feet. Oh, and we were all scratched up. We were just red from the thistles. The cattle it was bad. I think the government came out and they took some of the cattle that the farmers had. They had to cut the herd down, and they always took the best one. They took them, I think they took them and killed them, as far as I remember. The government, just, my mother said, I don't know why they have to come out and take the best one. In the first place, if they wanted to eliminate it, why didn't they let the people eat the meat? Why did they just go and kill them? That's what I remember about the 30s. My mother was very disgusted. And they had very little.
Did you have any problems with grasshoppers or
Oh, yes. Grasshoppers were bad. Sometimes the grasshoppers would come and then, they would kind of eat the paint, and the paint looked bad on the buildings when they were done.
Did you ever experience any dust storms?
Well, sometimes, yeah, I did. It just looked so dark, when the dust storms came up. I know my mother tried to keep her house clean, and then, there was dust in there and dirt. But she didn't give up. If that came in, that had to go. Get the dust out. So during that time, I don't think we did hardly anything. My folks just tried to keep things going. People were poor, and I remember some people didn't hardly have nothing.
Do you remember the WPA?
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us about it?
I think my dad worked there for the WPA. I don't know what they got. Very little. I think he worked on the road for the WPA. I don't know if they got $1 or $2 a day. It was very little what they got.
How about the CCC?
My brother went to CCC in Montana. He had to send his money home. I think to send $20 or $30 a month home from his. When we went out, like my sister and I, when we worked, we always kind of gave our money home because we wanted the rest of them to have something too. We didn't want them to sit with nothing. Even when I worked in Montana, I gave just about all my money home because there were 3 kids going to school and they wanted to eat too. That's how we figured. I usually gave most of my money home, whatever. I bought myself a few clothes, the rest, I never had any money.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the dirty 30s?
Not really. Just that it wasn't good. And they'd go out in the field and work, and then the dust and the dirt would come along. They didn't hardly pay for them to do anything. There was nothing.
All right. Then how did the outbreak of World War II affect your life?
Well, my brother got called to go, and he was married. I think they had 1 or 2 children. I think they had 2 children. So the final thing was he had to go, and then he left, and then I went to stay with my sister-in-law and help her with the cattle and the kids. So when my brother got down to camp, they found out he couldn't hear in one ear, so they sent him home. And then they rationed the sugar and the gas, and then I guess the nylons. I kind of remember that, the nylon stockings and the sugar and the gas. I wonder if they didn't ration the ketchup and stuff like that. There was things that you couldn't buy. But we didn't buy them anyway. We didn't have no money. So, I mean, we were at a loss. And I think as far as the gas was concerned, my dad didn't drive hardly any. They only went to town when they had to. So I'm sure he had enough gas.
Where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
I don't remember. I remember where I was when Kennedy got shot. Exactly. But you know, I remember hearing about Pearl Harbor. I just don't know where I was. That was in 41. Where was I? That was in the fall, around December. I wonder if I wasn't in school. Because I didn't graduate until 43. So I must have, could have been in December that I was in school when that happened. It was terrible. But when President Kennedy got shot, I absolutely remember where I was at. Or when the Trade Center went down, I remember everything. But Pearl Harbor, I remember that, but not exactly.
All right. Is there anything else about World War II you would like to share with us?
Not really. The only thing is we were afraid, you know, when World War II was. I was more worried than anything else, you know, with everything going on, and didn't know what would happen. I knew people that went, guys that went to the war in 42. We knew people that did, and some didn't come home. Yeah, that's been a long time now. It's been over 60 years.
All right. Can you tell me what your most stressful childhood experience was?
I think when the horses wouldn't go in the barn, I didn't like them, and I think they didn't like me either. So every time I had to help, we had to run around, and we had no gates or nothing, and then the horses would come charging at you, and that was stressful for me. I just couldn't stand it, you know, when they come running around. They wouldn't go in the barn, and we ran around there, and I would say that was stress. For me, it was. I was always scared.
All right. What was your happiest childhood memory?
I just can't remember. I'm trying to think what the happiest was.
Don't know?
Mm-mm.
All right. Then what was the most adventurous thing you did as a child?
I think when we walked to Linton, that was 7 miles, and back on a Sunday afternoon. We barely got back in time for milking. That they hadn't even missed us. That was another happy time.
And why did you walk to Linton?
We went to see our cousins. They lived on the outskirts of town. We went to visit the Malsums. I think they were as shocked to see us too. We walked all the way. I think they asked, "How'd you get here?" We walked.
All right. Is there anything else about your childhood memories that you would like to share with us?
I think when my mother was sick, I think that was a bad deal. See, my mother got hurt when she was pregnant with my youngest sister. Oh, with my sister that's a little younger than I am. She Must have fell outside. You know, we were working corn, and you know how everybody had to work those times. They had to rush her to Bismarck. And my sister was born at St. Alexis Hospital. Her grandchildren can't believe that she was born at St. Diesz in Bismarck. They said, I can't believe it, that you were born up here. And I think walking to school, it was stressful too. You know, we always tried to run and we couldn't get there. But we had a lot of happy moments too. It wasn't all stress.
Right. Is there any other memories you'd like to share with us? Okay. Why do you think it's important to share your life story?
Well, the thing is, people don't go through that anymore nowadays. It's good for people to hear about it in case they have to do that. You know, that they can handle it, because it can happen anytime. That you know you have to go through this. That things are not going to go the way you think they will. You know, you never know. Are you going to have electricity tomorrow? Is everything going to be okay? And if it isn't, I just hope that a lot of people just, you know that they can do it if they make up their minds. You can do it. That's a good thing to do.
Okay. Are there any other thoughts or observations you would like to share with us?
Not that I know of. I bet I'll think about it later.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your stories with us.
Well, thank you. You've been very nice.